crises are great character revealers, aren't they? And I have to say this: in 8 years that I worked for Barack Obama, he never once raised his voice at me. He had plenty of reasons to do it. I talk about mistakes that I made. Um, he had the weight of the world on his shoulders. Imagine that, being president of the United States. How many of us have worked for people and they just lose it all the time? They treat their people like dirt and you're like, well, they're under a lot of pressure and they got to blow off some steam, and so we take it. I'll tell you, if Barack Obama, president of the United States, could keep it together for 8 years and treat his people well and treat them with respect, that's the kind of boss you all deserve. We all deserve that person.
Welcome to Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Szuplat, co-founder of Social Driver. Washington is the center of influence in the U.S. and arguably the world. We are featuring leaders who figured out how to break through in today's fragmented and noisy world. Social Driver teamed up with the Communications Board and the George Washington University College of Professional Studies to recognize these leaders as chief influencers and highlight how they inspire and influence others. Welcome back to another episode of Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Szuplat, and today we've got a special episode for you. Last fall, we interviewed Terry Szuplat, a speechwriter for President Barack Obama, live on campus at our partner, the George Washington University. Well, in this episode, we're going to dive into some of the insightful questions our live audience asked Terry after the interview, and you'll get to hear his responses. Now, since we didn't have a mic in the audience, I'm going to repeat the questions. So let's dive in. Our first question came from Michael Pizos, president of the Graduate School of Political Management Student Association at GW. He asked Terry, what's your best career advice?
I'd say work with organizations and people whose values align with your own, because it doesn't mean you have to agree with every single thing that your organization or your leader does. I mean, I didn't agree with 100% of the things Barack Obama did. There wasn't a person in the administration who did. When you ask Barack Obama today, when you read his memoirs, there are things he wished he would have done differently. But the reason that I was able to stay for as long as I did through 8 years is because I always felt that fundamentally I believed in we shared the same values. And so he may or may not reach the same conclusion as I did on a particular issue, but also he's getting a lot more information than I am. But you will all find ourselves in occasions where we're not thrilled with what our organization or what the leader of our organization is saying or doing. But and if that happens too often, then yeah, if certain things are deal breakers, then you need to leave. And we see that all the time. We see that especially in government over policy choices, or people who just, this is so important to me. I can't be here. I can't be a part of this. I need to be on the outside pushing this organization, this government to a different place, but I can't be a part of what's happening right now. We see that all the time. So yeah, I would say, look whether this is a person that you believe in, and what are their core values? Again, back to those questions. Every speaker should ask it, but also everybody everywhere should ask. Because what are the values of that leader? Maybe they're not what I thought, and you especially see it in times of crisis when people get stressed and there's not enough time to make big long process to make every decision. Crises are great character revealers, aren't they? And I have to say this: in 8 years that I worked for Barack Obama, he never once raised his voice at me. He had plenty of reasons to do it. I talk about mistakes that I made. He had the weight of the world on his shoulders. Imagine that, being president of the United States. How many of us have worked for people and they just lose it all the time? They treat their people like dirt and you're like, well, they're under a lot of pressure and they got to blow off some steam, and so we take it. I'll tell you, if Barack Obama, president of the United States, could keep it together for 8 years and treat his people well and treat them with respect, that's the kind of boss you all deserve. We all deserve that. So I hope that's a second piece of advice.
Here's another question we got. Communicators are often learning and giving life to their principal's voice. In Terry's case, this was President Obama. So how do you find your own voice as a communicator?
So thank you for bringing that up. We haven't talked about that, but that actually is a big part of this book. So I think a lot of us arrive at anxieties and fears around public speaking and communications for different reasons in different ways. So I spent the better part of 30 years writing for other people. My job was to not think about what I would say and how I would say it. It was how would they say it? How do they think about it? So I could sort of confess there were probably a lot of times where I didn't think too deeply about what I believed. That wasn't my job. It wasn't relevant. It was what they believed. And I found that when I left the White House after 30 years, and I started getting speaking invitations, come talk to us, or what it was like to work in the White House, or I didn't feel like I had a voice. I didn't know. And you know what? A number of us as fellow speechwriters went through this process and worked through it in different ways. And so, yeah, I struggled with public speaking. I wasn't quite sure what my space was. I said very clear, I was not the chief speechwriter for the President of the United States. I wasn't even the chief foreign policy speechwriter. I was the deputy to both of them. And so some of my colleagues were out there delivering really powerful presentations, writing books, and like, well, what can I offer? I was the number 2 guy. We're already hearing from the number 1 guy. One of the number 1 guys has a world famous podcast, and he's phenomenal, and he's a friend. But so it's like, where's my space? Why would anyone listen to me? And I was a speech writer who couldn't hack it as a speech giver. But listen to what I'm saying to you. I didn't know those answers to those questions. Who am I? What do I believe? What do I represent? What's my space? Where can I contribute? And that all changed so I kind of stopped putting myself out there. I did fine sometimes, but I was struggling, and it was, public speaking is scary. And so I got invited to give a speech overseas, and 300 people, keynote address. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Absolutely not. I will never do that. And I'm thinking, I'm almost 50 years old. I'm like hiding from this thing. What an opportunity to be able to speak to a group. And I had something like 6 months to get ready. And I said, well, it was also overseas. It was going to be in Finland in November. So I'm like, if I bomb this, nobody will know. No, it'll just be like, it'll just disappear. So I felt I had this space, so why not try it? And so I spent those 6 months thinking deeply about all this. What can I offer this audience from my experiences? What were the stories that only I could tell? And what would be the lessons that I could draw on it? And so I went through that process, gave the speech. For the first time in my life, I got up and I delivered 300 people. I was terrified, and it went great. And this book is the lessons that I learned through that process. So, I went through it. Again, it's not that I didn't know how to write a speech. I've been writing speeches for other people, but again, getting up and doing it yourself, putting yourself out there, maybe being judged and maybe making mistakes is scary. But this is, in many ways, this is what I learned going through that process myself about how to find your voice again.
This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. I'm a proud GW graduate myself, and I can attest that the faculty members combine academic rigor with real-world lessons that can't always be found in textbooks. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. And our last question is, Terry, as a speechwriter for President Barack Obama, you had a gifted orator to work with, but not all leaders have that talent. How do you meet the speaker where they are?
Well, I'm so glad you brought up the point about Barack Obama being a naturally gifted speaker, because this is something I talk about in the book. And I actually believe there's no one who's a naturally gifted speaker. This is my argument here. So here I go. Ready? When Barack Obama burst on the scene in 2004, and everyone said, this 42-year-old man gave this amazing speech. And it was almost flawless. And so a lot of people started saying, oh, naturally gifted speaker. Well, one of the things he told me once, and I tell the story in the book, is that when he was a 20-something-year-old community organizer in Chicago, he had to stand up, give a speech to a bunch of philanthropists to recruit some donations to support his work, and he froze up. And he stammered, and he hemmed, and he hawed, and he had all this, get sweaty. And he said to me, I was terrible. I was not good. And he was embarrassed, and he felt stupid. I'm like, Barack Obama? This is who? This is Barack Obama as a 20-something-year-old. And so naturally, my question was, how do you go from that to what we saw? Again, by the time he's 42, so when you're 42, he's had years of work. So one of the things I'm thrilled to be able to share in the book is a story that's never been told before, which is how did he go from being a 20-something-year-old kid who froze up to being this gifted orator? Well, he worked at it. For years, he worked at it. And in the book, he tells you there were 4 specific places where he learned to become a better speaker. In the church basement, listening to the community, what they wanted, listening deeply to his audience who he's trying to connect with. Upstairs on the pulpit, listening to the preachers, because as he said, this is one of I love it. He said, preachers know how to preach. And he learned and he tried to, learn from them. Number 3, the classroom as a professor of constitutional law. Every day having to get up, every class having to be prepared, having to know what you're talking about, having done your work and engaging an audience and keeping them engaged. We have a lot of professors here. I'm an adjunct professor now. It's hard to keep a room engaged for 3 hours. That teaches you something. And the 4th area where he said made him better was the campaign trail. And he was very honest. I'm so grateful that he's very candid in this book about the things that he struggled with, both as a young man, as a candidate, and even as president. And he said, he had a tendency to talk too much wonkiness, too many details. He liked to explain things. He still does, but he talked about, so in this book is the story of how he became a better speaker. And I put that in there very deliberately because I want everyone, especially young people, to know that person who gave that speech at 42 years old didn't just pop out like that. They had to. So if I've frozen up at times. I'm sure all of you, many of you at one time or another have frozen up, stammered. He did too, and he got better, and we can all get better. So thank you for mentioning that because it's something I'm really passionate about. And then there was a second part to it. Oh, how do you when you're working with someone? Yeah, I mean, as a speech writer, again, I think humility is the watchword because you're not the one who has to get up and give the speech, no matter how passionate you are about the issue, no matter what you believe or how you'd say it. It's their words. And it's funny, only when I started doing more public speaking on my own after 30 years did I realize, wow, you have to be comfortable with these words. These are your words. No one wants to read something prepared by another person. No one wants that. No, if politicians, if they had time, they'd prefer to do it themselves. So it's your job. It's not so much, I would say, a job to meet in the middle. I'd say it's your job to meet way more, to meet them where they are and how do they talk? How do they think? How do they structure their argument? We, as speechwriters, we always say it's not just enough to capture their voice. We have to capture their logic pattern. Do they start global when they answer a question or make an argument and get specific, or do they start with the specific and then bring it out to a larger point? We would play this game sometimes when President Obama was giving a press conference. He'd get a question, and before he had a chance to answer, we'd try to think, okay, what's he going to say? Because our job was to think the way he thought, and it was kind of fun. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong, but it really is your job as a staffer, and to remember that we are staffers. No one elected a speechwriter. No one ever elected a speechwriter. We're all there because we chose that person to work for. So yeah, I would say it can be hard because not every leader is eloquent or even articulate, but you do your best. And I think there are a lot of things I write in the book too. A lot of leaders, I think, make mistakes too, where they're not happy with the drafts they get. This isn't what I want to say. And when I work with clients in industry, I get this a lot. My team just keeps giving me, I remember talking to a government official once, my team keeps giving me drafts that I don't like. It's not what I want to say. So, well, how often do you meet with them to tell them what you want to say? Well, I'm very busy. Speechwriters are not mind readers. You can't send your comms team and in a cave and expect them to produce beautiful content that aligns with your voice, your vision, your values, if you never tell them what your voice, your vision, your values are. And so actually did a webinar with a bunch of chiefs of staff from hundreds of different organizations. I'm like, this is it. This is my moment, because the chief of staffs make the trains run, right? They're the ones who decide, which meetings get cut, which meeting gets canceled. And so I like, this was my chance on behalf of the speechwriters of the world to say, every week the speechwriter, the comms team gets a meeting with the CEO, the head of the organization. you don't cut it. It's the last thing you should cut. You've got to meet, and the city is filled with, I see it all the time, and there may be people in this room, they're just suffering because they're talented and they're good and they want to work with their boss and they just can't they haven't met their boss sometimes. The boss doesn't know who they are. The senator, the congressman, they don't know who, and they're wondering, why am I getting this stuff that doesn't reflect who I am? So there's things we can do at the staff, but more than anything, it's the leaders have to. And again, we were blessed that Barack Obama would give us this time. I think everyone around him recognized that his ability to communicate was essential to his leadership. And so we didn't have to fight. We were so lucky we didn't have to fight for time. Sometimes we were fighting to get off the schedule because we're like, we weren't ready. We weren't ready to talk about this speech yet. And he is. So
Go to their boss and say, President Obama had time.
This is what I say in any organization. If any of you ever say the boss doesn't have time, if the President of the United States had time to meet with his comms team and his speechwriters, you do too. You have no excuse. And that's where so people say, make me sound like Barack Obama, or I want to be like a great speaker like Barack Obama. Well, you know what? Barack Obama met with his team, and it was a relationship. It was a mind meld. It was a collaboration. And some of the people who, John Favreau, Ben Rhodes, Cody Keenan, who led the team for all those years, credit to them because they maintained that relationship. So yeah, you can't, number one, none of us should sound like Barack Obama. We should sound like ourselves, and that's a big lesson in the book too.
This wraps up today's special episode featuring the Q&A from our live interview with Terry Szuplat, who was one of President Barack Obama's speechwriters. I hope you found something valuable to take with you. I know I did. And to check out Terry's full interview and much more, visit chiefinfluencer.org. Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver. We help clients transform complexity into clarity with people-centered strategies. Whether you're looking to elevate the influence of your brand or your leaders, check out socialdriver.com to learn more. For show notes or to nominate a guest, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn.